welcome back to episode 2 of Inside Founders, where we go beyond the headlines and dive into conversation about our latest news and milestones. My name is Harp Gossel. I am the Director of Investor Relations at Founders Metals, and today we'll be discussing the latest news release, the deep high-grade mineralization at Upper Antino. These results aren't just numbers. They're a signal that our geological model is standing up, expanding, and pointing to a richer story beneath the surface of Antino. Today, I'm joined by Colin Paget, our CEO, and Pascal Vogeli, VP of Exploration, to walk us through what this means for founders. Colin, can you recap the core highlights here? 18 meters at 6.14 grams per ton, and another 5 meters at 10.61 grams per ton, around 450 meters down. Why is this such a pivotal milestone for founders?
I mean, I think the proof is in the drilling. I guess it almost doubles our depth extent of mineralization. In our previous release with Upper Antino, we had put out results showing that we had gold mineralization down there. We were in the system, but we hadn't as yet hit one of the what we know to be very high grade shoots of mineralization that we're now seeing at depth. And what it really opens up for us is this opportunity that there is a replication of these shoots, or that there's a continuity of the same sort of high-grade mineralization that we see in the shallower parts of Froyo and Upper Antino. We're seeing that at depth. And really, I think geologically, and I'm sure Pascal would agree, we're right off of that Central Guyana shear zone, which is a, many kilometer scale structure that cuts through the entire Guyana Shield. And being so close to a structure of that scale, you'd expect these things to be very deep rooted. So we're very happy to see that the high grade is down there, and its connection or relationship to the intrusive rocks and things as well maybe helps us a bit with the targeting in the future, and potentially, with some of what we're seeing in the core points to there being more high grade as we go deeper.
So that's really interesting, because in our release, you talk about how this supports our geological model. Can you unpack that a bit and describe how you had taken that approach in the exploration of the space?
Yeah, I think overall, we look at it, it's a package of rocks that we're trying to understand what, first from a mapping standpoint, what are the different units that we have? And then after that, you're looking at the structural geology piece, understanding how things cut through those rocks, and then understanding what mineralization, what is gold actually connected to in terms of the types of rocks, alteration assemblages, all of that, and putting all of that together, doing quite a bit of work on it. We've really understood that, there's a large scale fold structure there. There's these shear zones that are coming up the limbs of that. Orientations are really starting to, I think we have a very good handle on that when it comes to the big picture. And now with some of these hits with the deeper mineralization, we're seeing that it is repeating. And so, that it bodes well for future, and it really, the model has been that it would repeat, and being able to actually, point to some high grade drill intercepts, showing that that's the case. After that, it means that there's a lot of opportunity to expand from what we had defined by drilling before.
So that now leads me to my next question. So this is for Pascal. Pascal, we've got 4 rigs running now on the ground. And with everything that's come out with the deep hole hit and every news release previous to this, what are we focused on with those rigs?
Yeah, so currently there are 3 spinning in Froyo, and then we have 1 in Giralda. But now as conditions improve, we're going to go back to a lot more discovery style work on new targets that we're excited about that share similar characteristics, as well as some follow-up work on the emerging targets that we released earlier this year. But so for Froyo specifically, a bit of a 2-pronged approach. Firstly, since this first pass of deep drilling was very successful, we're ready to follow up on that. And now that we have this big step that doubles that extent, as Colin highlighted, that also gives us another stack on that ore shoot. So a verification of the model. So now we like to step along the structure as well and continue to demonstrate that. And then with the other rigs, of course, going back into discovery mode. So kind of quietly in the background, our team has been doing a lot of really good superficial work and kind of some historical work that helped us, guide the direction. But we found some high grade components of a system that was formerly known as low grade. So similar style of story that we've been able to develop elsewhere in the property. So all that kind of foundational groundwork has been done. and now they're finally ready to be drilled.
I'm going to jump in and just add that because the Powerbow is what you're talking about in terms of finding some high grade mixed into the low grade. We've had access down there. It's basically along that same trend as Upper Antino, Lower Antino, and you get out to Powerbow, and had that big other anomaly historically, and access while we were waiting to get to the further afield things. It allowed us to do some work on the ground, and we've been able to find it's a pretty impressive shear zone that wasn't previously identified, with grades and graph sample 26, 27 grams per ton kind of stuff in graph sample, which is pretty spectacular. So yeah, I think that's another exciting one that we will get to at some point this fall.
This is all really exciting work that's being done, and being able to even focus on the fact that, we've had numerous discoveries on site in the last year, and the results that are coming out of the ground are very exciting. So can you guys explain to our audience, how does the role of surface programs at Powerbow or mapping at Van Gogh and Da Vinci play in at this stage and how we move forward?
Well, it's really the tip of the spear, right? So a lot of us, we kind of have this kind of foundational, regional, geologic, 30,000 foot view of where we think certain things are interesting, based, primarily on the central kind of shear zone, this place coming off of that, but also a lot of the major fold structures that control mineralization at Upper Antino and elsewhere. But that doesn't really help you point a drill. If you got, it's not the needle, it is the haystack. So from there, I think really just getting some primary data, and I think for a lot of this stuff, we're not even necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel. Like if we have a couple key characteristics that we think are interesting and we've been able to reproduce multiple times, just first level pass, do an auger survey. How does it look like? How high grade is the anomaly? Is there an anomaly? And how does it relate spatially to what we understand structurally? So that's a very low cost and very quick method of doing that first pass. And then once that first kind of check mark has been complete, then we kind of decide, is it drill ready, or actually do we need some more structural data? And then we decide whether or not we do some trenching or deep auger. So kind of that mixture of approaches is what we've done. It does vary, like target to target. Specifically, some of them are completely virgin targets. And there was no artisanal mining, so we have no structural data at surface. So some of those need a little more supplementary work to get them to a place where we're confident to allocate the resources, putting a drill. But very broadly, that's the rationale. And I think we're able to execute pretty quickly on that, because a lot of our teams have been working with us for 3 years now. And they've done it a few times. So that learning stage is done, and they can execute quickly. I think that's been demonstrated pretty well lately.
Well, I was going to say, I think the approach is definitely working. We've had some great news recently, and that's going to help me shift to our next kind of conversation point. With the fact that we're doing a lot of surface exploration and the approach we are taking is very methodical, how does that deepen the value prop for founders? How does this exploration really kind of shift us to our future?
When you really look at the value propositions for Antino, we've Upper Antino as a target or as an area, we've demonstrated through, I think we're up to 30, 100 plus gram meter intercepts on the drilling at this point. So we now have that foundation, and there's been a certain level of geologic understanding that's come from that, but it's all of these exploration targets, the Maria Giraldas, the Van Goghs, Laua, Da Vinci, Powerbow, and then I'm sure there'll be several others that we haven't put names to yet that come out of the property still. They all point to the question that we started the year with, and that's, how many Upper Antinos are there? And I think we haven't answered that question fully yet on the property, and the auger sampling work that Pascal's talking about, more drilling, but then that surface exploration stuff is really what drives that message and drives that information piece for us. Is we need to understand where are these anomalies first, and then we prioritize based on grade, proximity to Upper Antino, which is right now the kind of center of gravity for things that on the Antino project, and we go from there as far as exploration.
So how do we balance the need for scale versus grade when we're planning this and working on our data?
Grade is king ultimately, because it's going to dictate how much scale you need, but that's always a question that's kind of top of mind. It's like many places in the world. You can find lots of things that have a bit of gold in them, or even have some high grade gold but are narrow, but what you want to find is something that's scale that really can be turned into a mine, or that's going to be, close enough to the kind of the center of gravity that you have already, that it's going to be ounces that can go into a future mine plan that makes sense. So it's, you get into engineering trade-off studies, you get into understanding metallurgy for different areas. There's a lot of things that go into figuring that out. And that's things that we're working on. It's all kind of happening in the background behind the exploration work. But that's the gist. It's a lot of just understanding what's there first and then figuring out what can make sense in a future economic mine scenario.
Yeah. And just to add to that a little bit, I mean, to expand on grade being king, I mean, some of these higher grade targets, they can also unlock a lot of ounces in nearby targets that are kind of bulk tonnage, low grade. Again, zooming into Upper Antino, we have, Donut, which has some high grade on the contact intrusion, but dominantly a lower grade target, but it's only 500 meters now from the nearest shear in Froyo. So there's a lot of really clear synergy in those two deposits. But if you look at Boise, it's really nice to see high grade targets developing kind of in that Maria Giralda Bongo trend, because maybe those high grade ounces in a future mining scenario can unlock kind of some of the intrusions around it. So I think there's a lot of kind of clear synergies where 1 + 1 can equal 3, depending on how these targets in the emerging area play together with their adjacent prospects.
I think the irony too is that what we call low grade. So I spent a bit of time talking to a lot of Australians recently, and they're talking about things that are down to 0.2 grams per ton kind of thing, and these potential halos of mineable ounces. And I mean, most of the low grade type stuff we're talking about is around that kind of 1 gram per ton range of things. And so then it really comes to would you build or start a mine that's just 1 gram per ton, where we are? I mean, at a certain scale, yes, that would be sufficient, but for us, we really do feel like we are, and I very much believe that we are in a gold camp, and it's more than one deposit. I mean, these things grow. It's orogenic gold deposits in general, and so with these multiple different things, having that low grade, having the high grade, having those different components in different parts of the property, it adds a lot of flexibility to future mining scenario situation, and adds a lot of long-term potential for additional ounces through discovery or just through growth of the existing targets.
So this is actually a really great time to ask maybe a bit of a tougher question, something that we usually don't dive into conversation with is when would this mark this shift towards a resource estimate?
That is a question that we get quite a bit. The reality is we're still in the midst of our 60,000 meter program. We started this year with the goal really being we want to understand or delineate, what does the Upper Antino boundary look like? After that, it's how many Upper Antinos are there on the property? I think we'll continue to explore to answer that question probably well into next year, even as far as the how many Upper Antinos are there, because there's still a lot of potential for new discoveries outside of the ones that we've made already. But the resource question, at this point, we want to understand the limits of Upper Antino, understand what could go into a global resource with that. And if that's Lower Antino, Boise, one or both of those, we've got meters planned to drill this year at both areas with the goal of at least working to understand if that's possible, if that really makes sense. There's some of that trade-off work that needs to be done to understand that part of it too. But really I think getting a handle on what the big picture is first, and then you start working on how many meters do we need to infill, work backwards, and then take it towards a resource, and then ultimately later studies after that. The key message though is that we're in exploration mode through and through, and making a lot of progress there.
So that's the really exciting part. I think that's something that people often forget is that we are 365 days a year. We do have our own drill rigs. We can shift and adapt as information comes out of the ground. So that actually leads into my next question for Pascal. What does the rock look like, and what are you really excited about as we finish up the quarter of this year with our drilling campaign?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just exciting to get out these targets that we've been thinking and talking about for so long, right? And I think, we've been doing so much work on the superficial side to really prove them up. So specifically, coming to Parvo and Maria Giralda, Parvo, as we mentioned, was kind of like intrusive, low grade type target. But the fact that there's this high grade component that's starting to be visible is really, really interesting. And of course, we have analogies for that elsewhere in the property. So that's interesting. And another thing that's interesting about Parvo that I specifically like is if you look at the anomaly, it looks like it just ends, but it's actually just a floodplain. So really just putting a hole underneath the floodplain and seeing if that footprint's even more than it currently is, I think it's just some really interesting testing that we can do, and really looking forward to that. And things like Maria Giralda, since we're starting to see some of these more sediment-hosted things, which is actually more typical for a lot of the rest of the Gana Shield, and Suriname specifically, the fact that we're seeing such broad grade, but not just broad grade, but very good distribution of grade, that's very rewarding and very interesting. So I think growth on the things that we've already discovered, as well as these brand new things like Parvo, I think are really interesting. And I think for me, we don't really emphasize it enough, but the fact that 40% of this property hasn't even had a sample on it, I think is really interesting, right? And I think that's an important point to highlight. Like it is still an early story in a lot of ways, because half this property, where there's been 6-7 discoveries now, is unsampled. Like something like Van Gogh, it went from nobody ever even having a geostation there or a rock there to 3 months later having 200 gram meter products. So that's I think that's what excites me the most. Yeah.
Collins, you just heard from Pascal, there's going to be a great exploration plan for the remainder of the quarter. And I just wanted to get your take from a corporate side. What could the investor community look forward to for the remainder of the year?
Yeah, sure. It's a pretty simple rest of the year. I mean, we've got lots of drill results or lots of drilling ongoing. So we'll expect kind of continued news flow on that front. We do still anticipate putting together one of these more concessions, in and around Antino and really potentially more. I mean, we're really working on that front to start consolidating things in the area. And I find that a very, very exciting prospect and quite the catalyst when it comes to just potential scale and that kind of long-term, sustainable mine life sort of thing for a future mine operation. After that, it's marketing. We got quite a busy schedule this fall. We're off to Colorado next week for a couple of conferences, Beaver Creek and then the Denver Gold Forum. So looking forward to both of those and catching up with a lot of people, but meeting a lot of new investors. And really that's the name of the game this fall, is getting out and talking to as many new people as we can. We'll be pretty busy.
Well, that wraps episode 2 of Inside Founders. Colin and Pascal, thank you so much for joining me today and unpacking these breakthrough results and what it means for the market and for our strategy moving forward. And thanks to you, our investors, for joining in. Please subscribe, like, and follow to stay up to date with Founders.